We've been discussing the U.S.-Soviet nuclear competition from the late 40s to the end of the Cold War. Now we're going to talk about nuclear proliferation. Here's a set of topics that we'll address. With this put on B courses? These are put on B courses, so again, all of these sessions from my lectures are a good guide for what you need to review for the exam. So let's see, it's 5 to 6. I guess it would be nice to finish this by 6:30 or so. Then we take a break, and then there are the presentations by the groups of what you're doing. So I may have to compress some of this. I can go back to it another time if I'm missing certain things. I'll try and at least cover something on every one of the points that I'm mentioning. So to begin, nuclear proliferation was realized as a potential problem in the United States even before the first nuclear detonations were completed. We knew that the United States would not have a monopoly on this wisdom. I told you from the earliest days there was the path-breaking work in Europe about this, in atomic physics, and certainly after the Second World War ended and the two weapons were used and the enormous destructive power was demonstrated, it was clear that other states, other countries would try to acquire nuclear weapons. And since the immediate aftermath of the World War II led to the Cold War, we knew that the Soviet Union might be the first out of the box. And they detonated, as you know, the first device, other than the two U.S. devices, in 1949. So the Soviet Union was the second nuclear weapon state. Again, the definition of nuclear weapon state, there was a lot of disagreement about what it was. So the agreed definition is if you detonate a device, you're a nuclear weapon state. Then we could agree. Later, it got slightly modified. So, and of course, the other reason that we didn't anticipate the rapidity with which the Soviets developed and detonated was we didn't know in 1949 the extent of their penetration of the Manhattan Project and their complete knowledge of our designs, which meant that there were a lot of blind alleys that they didn't have to go down because they knew ways that worked. It didn't mean they didn't improvise. They did improvise. But so that was the second nuclear weapon state. And I think I mentioned maybe in my discussion group, I don't know if I mentioned in class. So for those of you interested in the origins of the Soviet program, there's an excellent Stanford-based historian, David Holloway, Holloway. He's actually from Scotland, but he is a lifetime career Sovietologist. And he's written a couple of definitive works on the development of the Soviet program. So it's quite interesting. So after that, the question was, who's next and is there anything the U.S. could do about it? And the U.S. decided that even with respect to the British, our closest ally, and the ones who we collaborated with on the Manhattan Project, it was decided by General Groves, head of the Manhattan Project, that the British would not be admitted to the work done to manufacture the first two nuclear weapons. The theoretical work, the work on metallurgy and explosives, they were all involved in, but it's still one thing to have it up on a blackboard. It's another thing to go into a factory and build the thing. And they kept the British out, which infuriated the British, understandably so. But even after the war, and it wasn't that we weren't close with the British, we were, it was just decided by the Truman administration that nuclear proliferation was something we wanted to resist at all levels, at all costs, even with our closest allies. And there was a legislative act passed, the McMahon Act, in 1946. Which expressly prohibited the U.S. from collaborating with other states to help them acquire nuclear weapons. The British were infuriated, but they had tremendous knowledge from the war program, from the Los Alamos program, and they were determined after the war, even though their empire was shrinking, they were economically in a disadvantageous position, they felt it was essential for their own security and also for their prestige to have nuclear weapons. So they proceeded on a very vigorous program of their own, and in 1952 they detonated. So they became the third nuclear weapon state. With the French, it's a more complicated relationship. We've always had complex relationships with the French. The French, were America's first ally in the Revolutionary War, if you remember from those days, Lafayette and all of that. The U.S. was essential to liberate France from the Nazis in the Second World War and to defeat the Kaiser in the First World War. But the French always had some ambivalence about the United States. They felt we were kind of crude, not very sophisticated characters, maybe with a lot of strength, but not a lot of wisdom. And the French have enormous self-respect and self-confidence in their culture and their history. And there's great French nationalism, and they wanted to stand on their own. If there were any doubts about the French-American connection from the French side, this was emphasized in the Suez Crisis of 1956, totally unrelated to nuclear weapons, but for various reasons in the Middle East. The British, the French, and the Israelis combined in a secret operation to seize the Suez Canal from the Egyptians without informing the United States. Eisenhower was then president. Eisenhower was absolutely furious that they would conduct such an operation without the U.S. knowledge. And for the first and almost only time in the Cold War, the Americans and the Soviets combined with the United Nations to denounce it and to put pressure on the British, the French, and the Israelis to withdraw from the Suez Canal. That, in turn, infuriated the French. And when de Gaulle came to power in 1958, the great French general, the liberator of France from the Second World War, de Gaulle was now president in 58. He said, we cannot trust the Americans. We cannot trust anybody. We must have nuclear weapons of our own if we're going to be a serious power. And only 2 years after de Gaulle took power in 1960, they detonated. Just a brief anecdote. Years later, in the late 70s, I was in France, and I met with a man named General Gallois. Pierre Gallois was the intellectual father of the French nuclear force. And I had this amazing dinner with him in his Parisian apartment that had like 60-foot-high ceilings, and this very long dinner table. At one end was General Gallois, at the other end was Monsieur Nacht, and in the middle was Madame Gallois. She said nothing the entire dinner. I didn't say much. He did 90% of the talking. It was served in this magnificent way. And then he, at the end of the dinner, sorry for this dramatic effect, but this is what actually happened. He looked at his wife, General Gallois looked at his wife and went like this, which meant she was dismissed. She left the room, and he summoned me into the study for brandy and cigars. So I went with him, just the two of us, General Gallois and Michael Nacht, into the study. And I said to him, so, it's a great honor to meet you, and I really would like to hear from you directly. What is the fundamental motivation behind the French nuclear program? And this is what he said to me. He said, Monsieur Nacht, he said, spoke very excellent English with a French accent. He said, you must remember one thing about we French. He said, we fought the Germans in 1870. We fought the Germans in 1914. We fought the Germans in 1940. We fought the Vietnamese in 1954. We fought the Algerians in 1958. We lost every war. Every war. We cannot defeat any serious contender with conventional weapons. We must have nuclear weapons to preserve the French Republic. I had a lot of brandy, and the cigar was choking me. I could barely get up, but I never forgot that. And it was really a totally genuine mark. He was a great French patriot. He looked cold-heartedly at the French performance in the wars and said, this is the ultimate deterrent. Somewhat separately, the Chinese, remember Mao took power in 1949, the Communist Revolution. They collaborated with the Soviets in the 50s, but then after Stalin died in 53, they developed increasingly tense relations between the Chinese and the Russians because the Chinese wanted to become the new leader of the communist revolution, and the Khrushchev said, no, the Russian Soviets are still the leaders. The Soviets helped the Chinese on their program. There was nothing to prevent them from doing so, but they gave them like yesterday's newspaper. They gave them obsolescent equipment. They didn't tell them all that they knew about nuclear weapons development. They put them on a slower track. They were never totally supporters of the Chinese having an independent nuclear capability. The Chinese were very smart. They realized this right away, and they used various sources to try to escalate their program. And in 1964, they detonated. So by 20 years or so after the first bombs, US, Soviet Union, Britain, France, and China were the 5 nuclear powers. But in the 60s already, having had 2 already in the early 60s, there was growing concern. There's going to be a flood of these states. There's going to be a whole domino effect. And there was a very famous British writer and scientist, C.P. Snow, who wrote many famous things, but one is called Science and Government. It's actually be interesting for you, your group, how scientific knowledge can help understand how to be effective in government. Science and Government by C.P. Snow. He wrote a piece saying that by the end of the 60s, there are going to be 30 nuclear weapon states. And the likelihood of nuclear weapon use is 1.0. We're going to have a catastrophe on our hands. So he was wrong, fortunately, but he sounded the alarm, and that alarm helped. So even though the US and the Soviet Union were still involved in the Cold War, the US and the British, combined with the Soviet Union, were able to reach agreement on a draft treaty called the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, or NPT. And this is the foundational international legal document to stop proliferation, the NPT, Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. By the way, I think I mentioned this in the past, but 30 seconds on just how a treaty enters into law. Maybe I mentioned this, but it's worth it. I just want to repeat it again. Every country is different. Every state has its own laws. In the United States, a duly authorized representative of the president, or the president himself or herself, must sign the document. In this case, LBJ signed the document, Lyndon Johnson. The document has to be signed by the other heads of state or other duly authorized representatives. Then each state goes through its own process of treaty ratification. In the United States, according to US law, a treaty is ratified if 2/3 of the Senate approves ratification. We have 100 senators, that would be 67 senators, but if a few are absent or something, it's 2/3 present and voting. Once the treaty has been ratified by the Senate, it is then sent to whatever places are stipulated in the treaty to be deposited. That's usually in the capitals of the relevant states, in this case, Washington, Moscow, and London, and usually in another place like Geneva, which is a home of the United Nations in Europe. So literally, physically, there's a copy of the treaty in Washington, signed by the heads of state, in Moscow, in London, and in Geneva. Once the duly authorized documents have been ratified and have been deposited, the treaty enters into force, EIF. Until EIF, no government is bound by the terms of the treaty. Is it clear? So EIF is the critical step that makes the treaty a permanent obligation of the parties to the treaty. You can be a signatory to the treaty, which means you can sign it, but unless you ratify and deposit, you're not a party to it. So we signed it in 1968. It took 2 years before 1970, when the 3 countries were parties to the treaty, signed and deposited their documents. They go through debates and so forth and so on. Now, the U.S. has thousands, even tens of thousands of agreements signed every year by the president or his delegated authorities. Most of them are not called treaties. They're called executive agreements. And the difference between an executive agreement and a treaty is one called an executive agreement and one's called a treaty. Executive agreements are usually signed because the Senate doesn't want to be clogged up with having votes on fishery rights with New Zealand and, whether we should import avocados from Paraguay and stuff like that. There's a zillion different things going on. Sometimes agreements are called executive agreements because the president knows that if he presented it as a treaty to the Senate, it wouldn't be ratified. An example of this was the Iran Agreement of 2015, which we'll discuss. So there could be two reasons. One is it's too trivial to be considered by the Senate, and one is it's too contentious to be submitted to the Senate. Okay? So remember, enter into force is the critical point for the legitimization of the obligation under the treaty. You're a party to the treaty. If you've ratified it, it enters into force when you deposit it. That's it. Okay. Now, lots of different pieces of the NPT. I'll just go through some of this now because we have quite a bit more to discuss. Basically, the NPT was divided into two groups of countries. And by the way, the NPT is a highly discriminatory treaty, unquestionably. So it basically says 5 states have a right to have nuclear weapons. It's totally legitimate. And no other country has a right to have nuclear weapons. Who gives these 5 states the right? Does God determine that it ought to be? No. The 5 states determined that they should have nuclear weapons and that nobody else should have them, claiming that the only way to prevent nuclear weapon use is to limit the number of nuclear weapon possessors. So for the nuclear states are US, Russia, US, Soviet Union, now Russia, UK, France, and China. Their responsibilities are to move toward nuclear disarmament, which so far after 47 years is moving, but slowly, and not to participate in any activities that can assist any other countries in acquiring nuclear weapons. They can't be proliferators themselves. Understand that? Okay. Everybody else, there are 194 countries that are parties to the NPT. That means there are 194 countries. That means there are 189 non-nuclear states that are parties to the NPT. Sri Lanka is a party to the NPT. Paraguay is a party to the NPT. Fiji is a party to the NPT. Sweden is a party to the NPT. North Korea was a party to the NPT and withdrew. We'll get to that problem in a moment. Iran is a party to the NPT, and according to the UN, has violated the rules of the NPT at least 15 times. The non-nuclear state responsibilities were to absolutely not engage in any activities leading to the development of their own nuclear weapons program, but in turn gain the assistance of a new body, the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is in Vienna, Austria, for assistance in developing their own peaceful nuclear programs like the kind Chris described. And also, the IAEA is involved in safeguards work and verification of existing agreements to make sure that there are no nuclear weapon states. We're going to try to get a terrific man here, George Moore, who for many years worked at the IAEA on safeguards. He can tell you a lot about how the IAEA actually works. So the IAEA was set up in Vienna as part of the NPT. In addition, it became clear right away that a core feature of nuclear proliferation is getting the material. If you can get the material, if you can get fissile material, you can go a long way to getting a bomb. So to control the spread of fissile material, a separate group of countries, more than the nuclear weapon states, because there are other countries that have fissile material coming out of their nuclear facilities, the Nuclear Suppliers Group was formed to try to coordinate all of their activities so that no one would advertently or inadvertently spread nuclear materials to potential nuclear weapon states. And so another feature of the NPT was to promote regional nuclear-free zone agreements. There's one, the Treaty of Tlatelolco, which is a Latin American nuclear-free zone agreement. So right now, if you think of any of the countries, think of the Central American countries, Guatemala, Costa Rica, the South American countries, Argentina, Brazil, Chile, Bolivia, Uruguay, they're all parties to the Treaty of Tlatelolco, which means they have all signed onto a treaty that says we will not seek to acquire nuclear weapons. And since that time, there have been other regional agreements. There's been agreements in sub-Saharan Africa and Southeast Asia and elsewhere. These are nuclear-free zone agreements. I don't know if you know it, but the city of Berkeley, California is a nuclear-free zone. So if you're personally thinking of acquiring a nuclear weapon while you're in this classroom, this would be prohibited by Berkeley city law, which is very serious. Any questions on the characteristics of the NPT and the follow-up measures? I'm giving you this is the Cliff Notes version.
I have one question.
Yes.
Are there any countries that have signed the NPT but haven't ratified it yet?
Actually, no. That's a good question. There are three very important countries that never signed and never ratified. Do you know which ones they are? India, Pakistan, and Israel. What do they have in common? They all have nuclear weapons. So they're not in violation of any international law because they never signed the treaty. Yes?
But that was because they weren't allowed to sign the treaty, right?
No. They were encouraged to sign the treaty. This is before they didn't have nuclear weapons in 1970. The Israelis might have had them. The Indians and the Pakistanis did not yet have them. Yes?
So, does the nuclear supply group involve every major miner of uranium, or?
Yes, I mean, remember, there's uranium in Australia. It's a non-nuclear state. There's uranium in South Africa.
Does this include even the poorer countries in Sub-Saharan Africa?
Absolutely. If you've got nuclear material to supply, you should be part of the nuclear suppliers group. So now there's a large literature on why do countries seek to acquire nuclear weapons and why do some countries deny themselves the willingness to acquire nuclear weapons. So what are the motives for proliferation? Here are a set of reasons why. One is they have real regional security concerns. There's somebody in their region who's a deep adversary, and they feel a need to deter attack by that adversary using their nuclear weapons. They want to deter the attack, or they want to compel them not to proceed with aggressive action against them. There's a lot of domestic prestige for acquiring nuclear weapons. When Pakistan acquired nuclear weapons, it was the first Islamic state to acquire nuclear weapons. It was called the Islamic bomb. It was hugely prestigious throughout the Islamic world that an Islamic country could acquire and detonate and stockpile nuclear weapons. When India acquired nuclear weapons, Mrs. Gandhi said that it was, just a huge shot in the arm to the government of India because the prestige that India could do this. And this is all breaking off the yokes of Western imperialism and that only the West could do it, but now developing countries could do it. International prestige. There are 5 permanent members to the UN Security Council. They're the only 5 who have a veto on the UN Security Council. They are the US, Russia, France, Britain, and China. What do the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council have in common? One thing, they're nuclear weapon states. So it's very prestigious, not only domestically but internationally, to have nuclear weapons. And finally, for some that have more sophisticated technical communities, there's a technical push for it. Technical top scientists and engineers go to the leadership and say, we can do this. We know how to do it. would be of enormous benefit. And whether the leadership thinks so, may not think it is important, they may be pushed toward it by the technical case for doing it. These are at least 4 or 5 reasons for motives. Can you go forward a little bit, Sheldon? No, go forward. Yeah. Oh, okay, I'll get back. Okay, so those reject, go. So let me go back a little bit. So early proliferate, after the NPT architecture was established by 1970, these 3 countries proliferate. Now the Israeli case is mired in obscurity. Their policy has been never to test, never to declare that they're a nuclear weapon state, but never to declare that they are not a nuclear weapon state. And the point of it is they don't want to purposely trigger nuclear proliferation in the Middle East, but they want to convey the sense that since they're surrounded by adversaries, that if they are attacked, they do have a nuclear option. They're unique in this set of characteristics. No other state has had what is sometimes called fostered ambiguity, purposeful ambiguity about their program. The India case is very different. India has 2 major rivals. It has Pakistan in the region, and it has China as a more global rival. In 1974, India, with no warning, detonated a nuclear device inside India, just across the border from Pakistan. They described this as a peaceful nuclear explosion. This is like a confidence-building measure. We just want to tell you that we're here. And they said peaceful nuclear explosions, or PNEs, are used to divert water, to knock down mountains that are in the wrong place, excavation, and so forth. Now, this was viewed enormously skeptically by the international community. You don't need to have a nuclear explosion to do this. You can do it with chemical explosives. But this was India's first demonstration of at least moving down a path toward nuclear weapons. And then in 1998, 24 years later, they detonated the nuclear device and declared themselves a nuclear weapon state. So they declared nuclear weapon state outside the NPT. Israel is not a declared nuclear weapon state. It's outside the NPT. Pakistan had its own program that was helped through what I call nuclear entrepreneurship. Can you move ahead? Right there. So they had a different approach. Pakistan did not have initially the capability internally to develop a nuclear weapon. An extremely smart physicist, A.Q. Khan, who had worked in European nuclear energy facilities, who was extremely knowledgeable about how to siphon off weapons-grade material like Chris spoke from enrichment or reprocessing facilities. For enrichment, you can enrich uranium. You know, it's when you take a scoop of uranium out of Australia, it's 99.3% U-238, and it's 0.7% U-235. But if you put it in a centrifuge and start whipping it around, it's like separating cream from milk. You're able to enrich the amount that you want to a very high percentage, up to perhaps 90% of the amount you have there of U-235. U-235 is fissile material. You can build a bomb with it. The other route is reprocessing, chemical reprocessing of the spent fuel rods that Chris discussed. The reprocessing technique produces not something in nature, but something in the process of the reprocessing process, plutonium-239. And you get enough plutonium-239 through chemical reprocessing and again you can build a bomb. So these are the two main routes to use facilities for nuclear energy to acquire fissile material for nuclear weapons: uranium enrichment, chemical reprocessing. Khan was able to develop that knowledge, develop plans for nuclear weapons fabrication. He may have had help from the Chinese. This remains unclear. This would have been a violation of the NPT by the Chinese. China and Pakistan are allies in the regional competition against India. He may have had collaboration with the Iranians, with the North Koreans, and with the Libyans, all of whom he visited and spoke to. He may have provided a lot of very important information to each of those countries and helped their programs. In any event, going back to the 70s, the president of Pakistan at the time, Ali Bhutto, said that Pakistan would eat grass in order to obtain nuclear weapons. They'd eat grass. They'd do anything. And there's a book written by a very interesting professor at the Naval Postgraduate School in Monterey, just a couple of hours from here. We've had him lecture in the past, Faraz Khan. And the title of his book is Eating Grass. And it was how the Pakistanis acquired their nuclear weapons program. They detonated right after India did in May of 1998. And they declared themselves a new nuclear weapons state. So you have 3 states outside the NPT framework of the permanent 5, Israel, India, and Pakistan. Israel non-declared. Current estimates are that they have 200 weapons. India and Pakistan. India with a smaller number, Pakistan with a much larger number, primarily of tactical nuclear weapons. And I'll give you one scenario that's of great concern with Pakistan and India. You know that, you may remember, I think it was 2008, the Mumbai attack. This was an attack by Pakistani terrorists and went into Mumbai in India. They were under the strict supervision of a Pakistani handler in Islamabad. And they entered hotels in India and massacred women and children and men. I forget how many people were killed. A large number of people were killed. By the way, are you familiar with the foreign policy analyst Fareed Zakaria?
Yes.
Does that ring a bell with you? So Fareed Zakaria was an Indian-born American through his contacts with the Indian intelligence community, obtained Indian intercepts of the communication between the Pakistani handler and the terrorist groups. And they did a program. You can go tonight on YouTube and watch it. Just put Fareed Zakaria, Mumbai attack. It'll come up. And it's really quite hair-raising because they have, and this was shown on HBO and on CNN. It's been shown many, many times. At one point, the Pakistani handler says to and they were all young kids. They were all in the early 20s, somewhere in their teens, the Pakistani terrorists. The handler in Pakistan said to them, remember what your job is. It's to enter the hotel, find women and children, kill as many of them as you can, as quickly as you can, and then be killed yourself. That's your mission. The vast majority of them were killed, but a couple survived. One was tried. He may have subsequently been executed. I don't know. So India was under enormous pressure to retaliate against Pakistan and chose not to do so. So the current, it's been an ongoing worry scenario for several years now, is the following. That Pakistan, either the government or a subnational group in Pakistan, launched another Mumbai-like attack. Again, killing innocent civilians and so forth. The current Indian government under Modi could not possibly not retaliate. So he would send a conventional military force into Pakistan to root out the terrorists. So far, still conventional. The Pakistanis, they fought several wars with the Indians, never defeated them once. Pakistanis would not feel capable of defending against this Indian incursion. So they would use low-yield Pakistani nuclear weapons on Pakistani territory to kill the Indian insurgent force. And then that would trigger a massive Indian nuclear response against Pakistan. And if you think this is all baloney, it's not. Okay? And who knows how many people would be killed. You realize, India has, 1.1 billion people. Even if just a few nuclear weapons are exchanged, the fatalities would be on CNN. It would be massive. It would make Hiroshima and Nagasaki look like kindergarten. So there's huge issues how we control that. We'll get into that a little bit later. So now A.Q. Khan was ultimately arrested, and he was never given, the CIA wanted access to interrogate him, and the Pakistani government never allowed that to happen. So he's never been interrogated. He's still alive. He was an eminent scientist. He's considered the father of the Pakistani bomb. He's a national hero in Pakistan. But he's under arrest, house arrest, for spreading the technology around. And we don't know if there are other A.Q. Khans, where they are, what they're doing. But the existence theorem has been demonstrated. Okay? So that's so much happy news about the nuclear weapons proliferation. Now, what about people, those who don't proliferate? Why wouldn't they proliferate? If all these countries are getting it, 8 or 9 countries, why shouldn't we be part of it? Why shouldn't Bolivia have it? Why shouldn't Indonesia have it? Why you name a country in the world, why shouldn't they have it? Well, one is they don't have a real security threat. A lot of countries don't have security problems. And it's hard to believe when you see it in the United States. We think the entire world's problems are all problems. But a lot of countries don't have any threats, so not necessary. Or they are reassured by other countries. The whole approach of the U.S. alliance system that Trump is now challenging, the whole NATO alliance, those security guarantees with Japan and South Korea, not only are intended to reassure them, they are nuclear non-proliferation measures. They're intended to dissuade them from acquiring their own nuclear weapons, because we'll protect them conventionally, and if necessary, with our own nuclear umbrella. So security assurance and reassurance can be a good reason not to proliferate. For some, it's too expensive. It costs too much money. It'll still be billions of dollars. For others, it's technologically, even now, it's too advanced. It's one thing to have it on the blackboard. It's another thing to be able to fabricate a deliverable nuclear weapon. Or they don't have the weapons-grade material. And there might be other reasons. And there are many who began to walk down the nuclear proliferation path and then stopped and turned back. Tokyo. The Japanese government under Prime Minister Nakasone in 1996 commissioned a secret paper on a Japanese nuclear weapons program. But they decided after the Americans visited them and said, if you build a nuclear weapon, we're out of here. No more security guarantees for you, maybe no economic trade with you. They said, the costs of proliferation far exceed for us the benefits of being a non-nuclear state. You're addressing the new scenario that maybe they've changed their mind. South Korea, in the 70s, had an embryonic nuclear weapons program. Members of the Ford administration went to Seoul and said, if you continue on this program, we're pulling out all forces from South Korea, we're tearing up the security treaty, you're on your own. They stopped. Taiwan, same thing, nuclear weapons embryonic program, visit by the Americans. We won't be there to defend you, no defense guarantees, no more arms, they stopped. Argentina and Brazil, who were rivals with each other, both had active nuclear weapons programs. I met with a key figure from the Brazilian program years ago. They decided it was too dangerous. It wasn't really necessary. There's hardly been any cross-border wars in South America in 100 years. They're rivals, but it's not led to wars. They have internal domestic problems, but not international problems. They both gave it up. South Africa, before Nelson Mandela, and during the Afrikaner period, when there was apartheid, they had a nuclear weapons program. The Afrikaners thought they were going to be attacked by a swarm of black African states. Once they began to lose grip on power, and they realized this was going to be a black-dominated country, they stopped and destroyed their program. And among the most painful examples, Ukraine. Ukraine had been part of the Soviet Union. Ukraine was the principal long-range missile designer and builder for the Soviet Union, better than the Russians. Ukraine had a lot of fissile material in Ukraine. After the Soviet Union collapsed, the U.S. wanted all that material corralled to either the Soviet Union or the United States. The Ukrainians said, what are you, crazy? We need fissile material to maybe have a nuclear deterrent because the Russians will come visit us again. The Americans said in 1994, don't worry about it. We'll take care of you. And there was an agreement signed in Budapest, Hungary. US, UK, and Russia. And it said, if you give up your fissile material, we guarantee your independent sovereignty. That was 1994. 2014, Putin took Crimea. Now he's taking the eastern part of Ukraine. Would you be a happy camper if you're Ukrainian? I don't think so. So, complicated stories here, each one different. Is that it? Okay. So that gives you some idea of where we stand. There's a lot more about proliferation. We'll get into the Bracken material, regional competition. We haven't talked about Iran, which is a huge deal in and of itself. Questions, comments, thoughts about proliferation architecture. Is it all clear? You understand anything you need elaboration on or clarification? Yes?
I have one question. And this may vary treaty to treaty, but if there are signatories on a treaty who haven't ratified,
Yes.
is it general practice that it's still in effect for the states that have ratified, or does it
Yes.
require also
No. It's in effect. It enters into force for all states that are parties to the treaty, who have signed and ratified. For the many who have signed but not ratified, it's not in effect. I can tell you a great example for the U.S., the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. This is a treaty to stop all testing. Right now we are limited to testing underground, although we haven't tested since 1992. Okay? The U.S. signed the Ctbt, signed the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. We never ratified it. Bill Clinton sent it to the Congress to the Senate in 1998. Senator Biden, at the time, was the orchestrator trying to build up support for ratification of the Ctbt under Bill Clinton. He did not do a great job, and it went down to a crashing defeat. Not only didn't they get a 2/3 majority, I don't think they got a majority. I think the majority of senators voted against. Why? Because they said, well, the Soviets will cheat. They can do low-yield testing. We won't verify it. We'll adhere to it. They won't. They'll get new advances in nuclear weapons. We won't. So the United States tonight is not a party to the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty. China is a party to it. Russia's a party to it. U.S. is not a party to it. Obama was flirting even in the last 6 months of his administration. We tried to push forward a Ctbt initiative, but I mean, under the Republican Senate, forget it. He wouldn't get, 40 votes. So you have to understand the policy process. It's not just enough to count the beans on who has nuclear weapons and who don't. That won't tell you enough about what's really going on. Yes.
So, back to our project like Tokyo, Japan and South Korea.
Right.
So, the U.S. policy is to assure them protection that in case of nuclear war. But
in case of war.
Or in case of war, but let's say it escalates to nuclear war, then suddenly the U.S. is involved now in nuclear confrontation and nuclear conflict.
Right, exactly.
But that's not the best interest of the national security of the U.S.
Yeah, right. So is it credible? Is the U.S. security guarantee credible? Yesterday, North Korea fired 3 new missiles into the Sea of Japan. Supposing tonight they fire 3 missiles that hit Japan. What happens then? What happens then is it's a military attack by North Korea against Japan. And the United States is obligated under the terms of the Security Pact to come to the aid of Japan, which would almost certainly mean a U.S. military attack against North Korea. And if we don't do it, then there's no credibility to the security guarantees, and God knows what happens after that. Yes?
What was Libya's history regarding proliferation?
Libya. So Libya also, I didn't include every happy story on the list. Gaddafi was also interested in nuclear weapons. Same reason, international prestige, domestic prestige. He didn't have any capability. They don't have anywhere near the nuclear technical infrastructure to do it. He was greatly assisted by A.Q. Khan. A.Q. Khan visited him in Tripoli a number of times. He brought with him blueprints for how to design and manufacture these. He might have provided some fissile material, but ultimately, interestingly enough, and this is another weird example, Gaddafi decided that if he didn't acquire nuclear weapons and he tried to integrate better into the Western economy, he could really benefit from this. So he withdrew the ambition to be a nuclear weapons state, and then shortly after there was a revolution and he was overthrown and killed. So the lessons from some people is, don't give up your nuclear ambitions. Get them. Get them. The Kim family has had nuclear ambitions for 50 years. They have them. They're still there. Maybe a horrible regime. Half the people may be starving to death. You may execute 20 new people a day, but they're still the same regime. Every regime's number one priority is to stay the regime. That's a number one priority. That's a number 5,000 priority. Stay in power. Everything else is derivative of staying in power. Okay? If nuclear weapons are a free pass to staying in power, let's get them. Saddam Hussein said he had nuclear weapons, but he didn't have them. He ultimately was invaded, tracked down, arrested, tried, and hung. People don't want to wind up like Saddam Hussein or Gaddafi, who was found in a hole, ripped from the hole, and shot about 20 times in the chest and the head. They don't want to wind up like Gaddafi. So what would you do? You'd get nuclear weapons. That's what you do. I'm just telling you the facts. You decide what to do. Yes?
Is there any, does the Non-Proliferation Treaty address regime changes, or like within the definition of nuclear state, that state like retains nuclear state status?
No. It just says there are 5 permanent nuclear weapon states. U.S., Russia, France, China, Britain. Everyone else is a non-nuclear state. The nuclear non-proliferation regime doesn't recognize India, Pakistan, and Israel as nuclear weapon states, although they are. They're just wayward states. They're not behaving. And North Korea is a whole separate issue, and Iran a whole separate issue, which we'll talk about. a separate session on that. Yes.
So, France provided assistance to Israel in making a nuclear weapon, but the reason why.
We're making the Dimona reactor.
Okay.
Whether they really were involved in the weapon development is a different story. There is an excellent book by a man also, he's at the Monterey, the Middlebury Institute of International Studies in Monterey, named Avner Cohen, Avner-Cohen. He's written a definitive book on the Israeli program, which discusses the French assistance. But it's based on unclassified sources and some leaked information. So he's never been in government, so whether it's totally accurate or not, I don't know. It's considered the most authoritative account of the Israeli program. So
what France did in helping develop the Dimona reactor.
it was before. It was
before.
Yeah, sure. It was in the 50s and 60s. You know, NPT enters into force 1970. All bets are off. And France had completely changed their policy. France had been the big arms supplier and supporter of Israel till the 67 war. After the 67 war, they became very pro-Palestinian and anti-Israeli. Now they're attacking back. It's a little bit more unclear. There were some other questions or comments here. Yes, sir.
Is there a process when the countries go to a coup d'etat or something like that, or how are you going to get control of the weapons? Something like internal damage in North Korea or like any.
Yeah, great question. What's the process? The U.S. does a lot of contingency planning about the process.
No, I guess it's there like any plans or anything that's learned from like the Soviet Union. Because like I'm pretty sure you probably pulled up from what some of their satellite states as well, right?
I'm sorry, say again?
So some of the satellite states of the Soviet Union probably had nuclear weapons as well.
No, the only ones, well, Ukraine and Kazakhstan, and they were removed. And Belarus had some small, almost indigenous Russian state. Belarus is a separate sovereign state. But yeah, two of the biggest concerns are North Korea, with regime change, possibly Pakistan. Although in Pakistan, there have been public opinion polls on the greatest threat to the security of the Pakistani nuclear arsenal. By far, what's the greatest threat? United States. The United States is the great threat because they say, we know what you want. You want to come in and steal our weapons. That's what you want. We want them to be secure so that they can't be stolen, they can't be, ISIS can't take some, or Al-Qaeda, and that they're secure. This problem is not waning. This problem is on the up escalator. That's why Bracken calls the second nuclear age. First nuclear age was US-Soviet. All the things we talked about earlier. There's a second age involving regional players, different strategies, different concepts, maybe deterrence and compellence and all these things we talked about may be irrelevant. Maybe they don't think in those terms. And maybe they're less reluctant to use nuclear weapons, although they haven't used them yet. I had a nice experience. I'll just mention, I think I may have mentioned that probably the single most prominent nuclear strategist in the United States of the 20th century was Tom Schelling, an economist who won the Nobel Prize. So I got to know him very well. And just a couple of months ago, he passed away. He was 95. So his widow asked me to speak at his memorial service, and I was just there last Tuesday in College Park, Maryland. They're going to have two services, one in Maryland, where he spent the last 15 years, and before that at Harvard, where he spent 30 years. And he was an amazing figure, but it was pointed out by one of the other speakers that when he accepted his Nobel Prize in economics on the role of game theory and understanding nuclear strategy, when he went to accept the prize, in his speech, he said the most important development of the 20th century was the fact that nuclear weapons have not been used since 1945. The tradition of non-use was sustained. Now, is it going to be sustained throughout your lifetime over the next 60, 70 years with what's going on here? Not a single weapon will be used anywhere against anybody. Good luck. Other questions or comments? Okay, so why don't we take a break till, let's say, 5 after 7, and then we'll